Good morning from Hunt City Congregational Christian Church. It is the first Sunday in June. Our worship is at 10 a.m. if you're able to come out and join us. If you ask people to list the top 10 Bible stories, not counting stories about Christ, not talking about Jesus's birth, his miracles, his death and resurrection, if we took that out and you ask people to list the top 10 stories from the Bible, undoubtedly the story of David and Goliath would be up near the top. We're all familiar with it. So is it possible for us to even look at it with fresh eyes and with a fresh heart? I don't know. Let's see. We've been in 1 Samuel for a while. We are in 1 Samuel 17. I'm not going to read the entire chapter, but I'm going to read some of the preparation leading up to and then including the battle between David and Goliath. Starting in verse 1, now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle and were gathered at Succoth, which belongs to Judah. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah and drew up in battle array against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, with the valley between them. And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head. He was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels, and his shield bearer went before him. Then he stood and cried out to the armies of Israel and said to them, why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves. Let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. And the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all of Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Jumping down to verse 26. David spoke to the men who stood by. Now, in the meantime, Jesse had sent David, his son, to his brothers with Saul to take food and rations to them. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. So David now has reached the camp of the Israelites. Then David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him in this manner, so it shall be done for the man who kills him. Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David. And he says, why do you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. And David said, what have I done now? Is there not a cause? Then he turned from him toward another, and he said the same thing. And these people answered him as the first ones did. Now when the words which David spoke were heard and they reported them to Saul, and he sent for David. Then David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him, the giant. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. Saul said to David, you're not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went after it and struck it, and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. Moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself, I'm jumping down now to verse 40. Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag, in a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand. And he drew near to the Philistine. So the Philistine came and began drawing near to David, and the man who bore his shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and good looking. So the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come out to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David. by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." So it was when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, that David hurried and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. Then David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone, and he slung it, and it struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and he struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword, drew it out of its sheath, and killed him, and cut off his head with it. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Now the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued after the Philistines, as far as the entrance of the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell along the road to Shaaraim, even as far as Gath and Ekron. Then the children of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their tents. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. Goliath was 6 cubits and a span, over 9 feet tall. He's daunting, and he's taunting the army of Israel. Even his weapons and his armor are intimidating because of their size and their weight. For 40 days, he comes out every day and taunts the Israelites, "Send someone out to fight me. If he beats me, we will be your servants, but if I defeat him, you will be our servants." Saul and Israel, it says, were dismayed and afraid. And it's interesting that the one thing that they were not doing, Saul and the Israelites, was praying. They weren't praying. They were just seeing the dire straits they were in. This is a glimpse of what King Saul was. He could only see his army and the Philistines and Goliath. As we said last week, walking by faith, which Jesus said and which Paul said we have to do, it's not just a New Testament thing. We see it from almost from the beginning of the Word of God. Walk across the Red Sea on dry ground. Walk by faith and not by sight. March around the city of Jericho. Blow trumpets and yell. Abraham, go up on this mountain and sacrifice your only son. Walk by faith, not by sight. Go into that fiery furnace. Go into that lion's den. Walk by faith and not by sight. It's not a new concept in the New Testament. It's the way God intends for our relationship with him to be. Saul and the Israelites didn't see any way they could defeat the Philistines. They were dismayed and greatly afraid, it says. And that was Goliath's intention when he went out there every day to taunt them. That's the reason he came out in his battle wear and taunted them. It was because he wanted them to be afraid. David Guzik says in his commentary, Goliath defeated Israel with fear alone. They were defeated and not a sword had been lifted, not a bow had been drawn. Remember back in 1 Samuel 9:2, it talks about Saul when he was selected to be king. It says, his name was Saul. There was not a more handsome person than he among the children of Israel. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people. So Saul stood head and shoulders taller than any of his soldiers. It might seem that Saul would feel that he was the one that should go out, since he was the biggest warrior in Israel. He probably thought that it would be that he should be the one to go, but he was not ready or not willing to. Earlier, Saul had displayed great bravery as a leader and as a warrior. However, as we read last week, when David was anointed king, the Spirit of God has now left Saul. So Jesse sends his youngest son, David, to take food to his brothers and some of the other Israelite soldiers. Maybe this was how rations were provided for the soldiers back then. Their families sent food to be distributed among the soldiers. Those not in battle took food to supply them. The situation was so desperate that Paul offered a three-part reward for anyone who would go out and defeat Goliath. There would be a monetary award. He would give one of his daughters as a bride, and the family of the man would receive a tax exemption. That's in one of the scriptures that we didn't read. If they would go out and fight Goliath and win, they would receive money, they would receive a wife, and a favorable tax exemption for his family. So David comes, and here he is, this boy among the soldiers of Israel, and David sounds pretty cocky. He says, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And David's oldest brother, Eliab, is mad at David's attitude. Kind of reminds us of, you remember Joseph and his brothers? He was the youngest or next to youngest, and his brothers didn't like him because of his attitude. Eliab here is angry with David because of his attitude. He rebukes David. He says, "Shouldn't you be back taking care of Dad's sheep?" He thought David had no right to express an opinion. He hasn't earned the right to have an opinion. He's just a kid. What does he know? And so David says to Saul, "Your servant will go and fight with the Philistines." And this is the first time that David specifically said, "I'll go. I will go and fight the man." And it's one thing to say somebody needs to do something. That's what we generally do in church or in the world in general. Somebody needs to do something, but we never see it as us being the one that needs to do something. David is saying here, "I will do something about this enemy." And Saul says, "Well, we appreciate your offer, but you can't. You're just a kid." David explains that while he was tending sheep, he defended the sheep from lions and bears. He killed a lion, he killed a bear, and protecting his flock. So he said, "I can fight. I can fight." The lion and the bear that David killed were preparation for this battle, maybe preparation for trusting the Lord. David Guzik in his commentary says, other soldiers focused on the danger of the battle or the material rewards to be won. David was concerned with the reputation of Israel and the honor of God. And this truly shows David to be a man after God's own heart. He cares about the things that God cares about. He saw the problem in spiritual terms, not in the physical, not in the physical. When you and I look at what's going on in our country or in the world today, do we see it in fleshly, in worldly terms, or do we see them in spiritual terms? It matters. It matters how we see them. So Saul tries to get David to use his armor. David has trouble wearing it. It probably fits poorly. It's heavy, and he's never tested it. He said, "I've not tested this. I can't wear it into battle." So he took them off. David Guzik in his commentary here says that David is saying, "I will not fight with man's armor. I will trust in the Lord and his armor instead." Why did David choose 5 stones? He only needed 1 to kill Goliath. Well, some suggest in 2 Samuel 21:18-22 that it's possible that Goliath had other relatives who were also giants. So maybe that's why he chose 5 stones. We don't know for sure. That's speculation, but it could be a reason. So David goes out to meet Goliath, and there's nothing about David and his appearance that would strike fear in Goliath or would intimidate Goliath. So Goliath immediately begins to mock David. "Am I a dog? You come out here with sticks?" He says to David, "I will kill you and leave your carcass for the birds." And then David has a great line here, a great quote, where he says to the giant, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, who you have defied, and I'm going to kill you and cut off your head. Pretty bold words. David was not intimidated by the giant. David was careful to say, the Lord will deliver you into my hand. He was bold, but not himself. He was bold in the Lord. He knew the battle belonged to the Lord. So with his sling and one stone, he struck Goliath, knocked him down, probably knocked him out. It says the stone lodged in his forehead. And then he went and took Goliath's sword and cut off Goliath's head with his own sword. The Philistines saw that their champion was dead. They took off. But that's not the reason that David did this. He said was that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. This whole incident made David famous, but David was quick to deflect the honor and the glory to the Lord. He says the battle is the Lord's. He wanted all the earth to know that there is a God in Israel. And it's a great story. And you and I will probably never be in a physical confrontation like this, but we might. I don't know. We will be in spiritual confrontations. We will face problems, physical problems. As we get older, even when we're young, we can have physical problems and spiritual problems, primarily spiritual problems. And spiritual problems will never be handled by physical means. They'll never be handled by political means. Spiritual warfare calls for spiritual preparedness and spiritual weapons. So how can we be like David? Well, Paul gives us an example of that in his letter to the church at Ephesus, where he says, finally, my brothers, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Therefore, having girded your waist with truth, having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and having shod your feet with the preparation of the gospel of peace, above all taking the shield of faith, with which you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, praying always with prayer and supplication in the Spirit, being watchful to this end, and with all perseverance and supplication for all the saints. God prepares people for what he will have them do. He prepares us for what he will have us do. What is God preparing you to do? And what are the weapons that we have? Truth, righteousness, peace, faith, salvation, the word of God, and prayer. There are no better weapons for a Christian to carry. There are no better weapons for a Christian to have in his heart. God prepares us for what he will call us to do, just as he prepared David, just as he prepared countless others throughout the word of God and as he has throughout history. God bless you. Read this story of David and Goliath, and it will give you encouragement. And that's just a great story to share with your kids and your grandkids. God bless you. Have a great day.